I'd like to open any questions to the floor to give you prominence. So if you do have any questions, please, now is the time to put your questions to the three speakers.
James, during your presentation, you briefly touched up upon the possible implications post-AFM directive on setting up funds and fund managers. What about funds and managers which are already existing? What type of transition are you expecting, and what type of sort of interaction are you expecting with the regulator?
First of all, I think that the managers who are already authorized today, they need to start thinking about the IFMD now, if they haven't started thinking about it yet. Obviously, there is a transitional period of 1 year within which they can align their position fully with the directive. But the later they align their position, if they're managing onshore structure, the later they benefit from the passport ultimately. So at the end of the day, I think that the directive is there. The biggest change that I think will need to be implemented for the smaller manager is the segregation of the investment management function from the risk management function. I think that at the fund manager's level, that will be the single most sort of more important change that they will have to implement. This is on top of the restructuring of the fund, because let's not forget that under the IFMD, there is an obligation for the manager to make sure that insofar as he's managing onshore funds, those onshore funds are fully in compliance with the directive. It is up to the manager to satisfy itself that the fund is compliant with the IFMD. So for those managers which are managing onshore funds, if there is a prime broker, for instance, and there isn't a separate custodian, and the prime broker is clearly not willing to split the custody and safekeeping function in line with the parameters set out in the IFMD, that's where the manager needs to start thinking and advising the board that we need to do some restructuring here. So again, negotiating custody agreements with a custodian is not something which you do overnight. And so people will really need to start thinking of the changes that they need to do internally within the fund management operation. Assuming responsibility for the fund administration, for example, that's another thing that under the IFMD will have to be implemented. So changing the mandates within the fund by terminating the current admin agreement or novating it in favor of the manager. So these are all things that will have to be implemented over the course of 2003, 2004. So I anticipate it's going to be a very busy year for us, let's put it this way.
Could I ask you a question, James? the independence of the risk management function, I think is quite a fascinating one actually, and how that's going to play out. Do you think there will be scope for corporate risk managers? In other words, you've got this authorised corporate director regime in the UK, for example. Do you think there'll be scope in Malta for the establishment of corporate risk management companies that actually do risk management for other schemes? For sure.
Today, the risk managers that we see getting involved in our fund clients are mainly handling more of the monitoring function than actually doing the risk management checks themselves. So they're not the ones putting the portfolio on Bloomberg and calculating VaR and making sure that the collateral is monitored and that any rebalancing is taking place and all that stuff. So today, within the context, for instance, of a self-managed UCITS where you need an independent risk management function or independent risk manager, the day-to-day work is still shifted downwards to the manager through the independent risk management function.
And they're just taking it as read, aren't they? They're not actually verifying that any of it is true.
They're obviously assuming more of a monitoring function than anything else. But to the extent that you have managers which do not outsource the investment management or risk management, I mean, they do it in-house, I see a lot of scope for them saying, I'm going to focus on investment management, I'm still going to earmark someone who will make sure that my outsourcee is actually doing the work properly, but doing the number crunching through an outsourcing agreement of the risk management function. Yes, but you still need to make sure that you identify someone who will assume that monitoring role, because at the end of the day, we need to keep in mind that whenever you outsource, you need to have someone who is monitoring the activities of the delegate. That's a principle which has been there for a very long time, and I think that the MFSA will focus much more on making sure that It's not a matter of delegating the function and then it stops there. That there is proper monitoring in terms of ongoing reporting to the risk manager of the checks and other matters which are carried out by the delegate. I wouldn't be surprised, and I've seen it in the case of a particular client, where the MFSA insisted for the risk manager to also undertake physical meetings at the delegate, at the offices of the delegate at least once a year. So I think that, and they also insisted for instance, bi-monthly or initially weekly, but then bi-monthly reporting to the risk manager. So they are really expecting the risk manager to take a hands-on, even where the day-to-day functions are being delegated. So it's not a matter of delegating it and saying, oh, I'm forgetting about it, risk management done. Yeah. But it takes a bit more than that. Because
of course as well recently we've had the JPM fiasco in London, where $2 billion of money's just disappeared, and Jamie Dimon, the JPM CEO, goes to Congress and says, hey, don't know how that happened. Yeah. So you've got a problem with risk management really across the board there, and you do wonder whether as a result of that the FSA in London are going to be saying, yeah, maybe the risk management here should have been done by somebody other than JPM's own staff.
Yeah, but it's happening today, because today it's normal to outsource the risk management function, but it's much more normal to outsource it to a sub-investment manager as part of that delegation, rather than to outsource it to a third party sort of specialist risk manager.
I think important, obviously, also to remember is the size of the mandate. So we're talking of a large organization, obviously it can afford to have the independence and proper segregation. We're talking of a small manager or funds, the MSA probably will allow for a liberty until it grows to a certain size to be able to get it done. If not, they'll stifle the growth progress in Malta, because there isn't going to be that amount of caliber, staff experience to be able to facilitate throughout all the services. So I think that the size of the mandate and the size of the manager should also be relevant.